President Levits, many thanks for speaking to DW today. Now, you've come to Germany just at a time when it has committed billions of euros more in support to Ukraine. And yet Olaf Scholz, on one of the main questions, whether to provide Ukraine with fighter jets, is still very much holding back, very skeptical about that. You've spoken out about that for a long time, that Ukraine should get everything it needs. What's your message to him on jets?
I think we all in NATO and in the European Union should think about how to support Ukraine, also in the first place, of course, now very actual military support. And we need to support Ukraine with all necessary equipments, necessary weapons. We don't have fighter jets, Latvia don't have, but countries which have tanks and fighter jets should think about.
But think about or actually do? I mean, Olaf Scholz has come pretty close to sort of ruling out even providing jets.
It's up to German policy makers to decide on that. But I think we have agreed in the European Union and in NATO to support Ukraine so that Ukraine can resist the Russian attack and also to win the war. And if we have this goal, then of course each country should think about what could be the contribution of each country to achieve this goal.
And up until now, I mean, there's been movement on things like tanks, but do you feel that Ukraine has now what it needs to win that war? What we're hearing from the Ukrainians is not yet.
Of course, Ukrainians know better what is the actual situation, and we rely on Ukraine in this respect. But it is a very good sign that already the first Leopard tanks arrived in Ukraine, as Chancellor Scholz already promised a time ago. I think Germany is supporting Ukraine with very considerable support in absolute terms. And this should be continued.
Now, Vladimir Putin has recently said that he's going to be moving nuclear weapons to Belarus. What does this, how do you interpret that? And what does this mean for Latvia? After all, Latvia borders both Belarus and Russia.
For Latvia, we have consulted also other allies. The NATO appreciation for the moment is that this does not change the military situation as a whole. So, because the nuclear weapons, it is not so important where they are directly, because they could be used also from different places. But of course it's a signal, it's a political signal from Russia that Russia does not want to have peace. Russia wants to continue the aggression in the Ukraine.
Now, Latvia, of course, along with the other Baltic states, is right there in the region. It's right up against Russia. NATO, since the beginning of the war, has increased its presence in the Baltic states, in Latvia. Do you feel like it's enough, or do you want NATO to do more? Is there more that needs to happen?
We have agreed in NATO summit in summer 22 that the eastern flank of NATO should be strengthened. There should be more military capacities. And in the next time we will have more NATO troops also in the Baltic region, but in the eastern flank in general. Because the NATO doctrine is now, after this very clear Russian aggression, deterrence of Russia through military capacities, through credible military capacities. And this investment in military capacities is in the same time investment in peace, because if Russia will know that in the case of attack Russia will lose, then they will not decide to attack. And this is a logic which by which we should be very serious, and therefore NATO and of course also Latvia, but also Germany, now investing in military capacities, in strengthening of the military capacities in order to keep the peace in Europe.
But specifically, you know, what the steps that have been taken in the Baltic states so far, do you feel that that threshold of credibility has been reached, or does more need to happen? You know,
this is not one point when we can say it is reached. We are increasing these capacities so that for Russia it is clear that there is no sense to attack. And I think we in Latvia, but also NATO as a whole, is investing in more capacities in the whole eastern flank. Also, this is we should understand that it is not an attack against one country, it is an attack to the NATO. And NATO is a union or an association of 30 countries. And the whole NATO eastern flank, from Estonia till Bulgaria, this is the area where the capacity should be strengthened, and very soon also Finland. Also Finland will have a very long common border with Russia, 1,300 kilometers. We have 200 kilometers. So this eastern flank, then from Finland to Bulgaria in the south, should be strengthened. This is our common politics, also Latvian, US politics, of course, and also German politics.
But specifically, I mean, there are some calls for sort of permanent basing rather than this sort of rotational principle in the Baltic states. Where do you stand on that?
Yes, of course, permanent deployment is also part of the strengthening of NATO eastern flank. This is a process. It is not tomorrow, but is a process, so that we will in due time, not very in previsible time, have also more NATO troops in the whole eastern flank. We should count also the Finnish troops, of course, in Finland in a few months, when there would be officially Finland a member of NATO.
I'd like to talk about China, because China's been very much entering discussions about, you know, trying to find peace at some point. It's brought out this position paper with 12 points with its view. What do you make of the paper and what China's been saying recently?
I rely on the appreciation of President Zelensky of Ukrainian government. President Zelensky said that he is looking positively to Chinese engagement. Because there is one point also in the 12 points, that the territorial integrity of all countries should be guarded, should be respected. And it is exactly that what Ukraine wants. To restore the territorial integrity. So we will see what kind of involvement of China we will see. For the moment, it seems that Russia is not interested in the restoration of territorial integrity of Ukraine. But we will see. Also, this is, in principle, Ukraine is appreciating rather positively, this engagement, and we will see.
But we've seen just how close Russia and China are at the moment. Xi Jinping was very recently in Moscow. You know, very, very strong symbolism of that relationship. And both what they share is an analysis that it is NATO expansion that ultimately led to this war. Now, Latvia is a shining example of this NATO expansion. So what do you say to China to rebut this argument that you're part of the problem?
It is a fake argument. NATO is a pure defense association. And it would be very false from our side to to go into the paranoid argumentation of Russia, because it is, you know, also I don't think that in Germany someone is thinking about attacking Russia. No, it's clear. It is a fake argument. But in other way around, Russia attacks Ukraine, previously attacked Georgia. There is a real threat from Russia to other countries, and therefore the natural reaction is to join NATO. It is the choice of the countries there. So we should not go into this fake argumentation.
But China is also angry
Yes.
about what it sees as
China is very carefully looking what would be the result of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. If Russia will have some benefits of them, that means for Russia, for China, that the West is weak. West cannot defend itself. And of course, especially US is weak, the West in general is weak, so that China would also have some interest to expand, especially in the first time in East Asia. Taiwan, first place, but also other countries, and the other countries in East Asia are very worried about that. It is interesting that during the visit of Xi in Moscow, the Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida, was in Kiev, and Prime Minister Kishida said, expressis verbis, Ukraine today can be East Asia tomorrow. Also, China is not heavily involved, maybe rather politically rather on the Russian side, but they are staying apart, and they will look what would be the result of Russia's attack to Ukraine. And for China, this war is a test for the West, for the strength of the United States, for the strength of NATO, for the strength of the West. And therefore it is very important for the West, for Europe, to support Ukraine, not to allow that Russia will win the war and have some benefits for that.
Now, China, for its part, though, is angry about what it sees as NATO kind of expanding its horizons into Asia, connections. Also, you mentioned Japan, the AUKUS submarine deal. It puts all of this under what it says is a sort of a Cold War mentality, and accusing the American-led West, broader West democracies of lining up against China, trying to contain it. What do you say to that?
Of course, the other countries don't want to be within the sphere of influence of Russia or the sphere of influence of China. Therefore, Japan, South Korea are very worried about that. And it's also interesting that by the last summit of NATO, the Prime Minister of Japan was there, the President of South Korea was there, as the Prime Ministers of Australia and New Zealand. I think we should look where is the source of aggressive mind, not the NATO. It is clear it's a Russian ideology here in our region, but also the politics of China against Taiwan in the first place, and also other regions in Eastern Asia. I think we should not mix up the source of aggression or aggressive mind in East Asian case with the politics or of seeking to defend itself.
Just a final question, looking to the United States, we're beginning to enter kind of election mode there. The Republican Party, there's movement. Donald Trump is out in front. He's got a very sort of isolationist sort of attitude, doesn't care much about the Ukraine war. Ron DeSantis, his main challenger, seeming to kind of cleave towards Donald Trump's position, suggesting that it's not really in America's interest, it needs to turn to Asia and focus on China. What's your message to Republicans, kind of considering the way their party wants to go and sort of being drawn towards an attitude that Europe doesn't matter anymore?
Yes, such signs are there in some political circles in US. The idea of isolation, that US should not care about the world, is always been there. There was sometimes it's more stronger, sometimes not so strong. But I think the majority of Americans know that it is in the interest of the US to be on the world's stage, and that Europe is the best ally of United States, because we see that the West as a whole, I mean Europe plus North America plus some countries like Japan, Australia, South Korea, which built so-called West, which is united by common values. This is a common basis why we can speak about the West. The West are only one player in the multipolar world, but we should be strong enough at least to defend ourselves. Because if we don't want to give up our values, then it is the way how we can keep our identity as democracies, our values. So we should invest in our defense.
Egils Levits, many thanks for speaking to DW today.
Thank you.